Okay, we are here for presentation skills for subject matter experts, for SMEs, how to be clear and concise when your brain is full of data. And I am Dale Ludwig, president and founder of Tripping Communication. Greg Owen-Boger was supposed to be here today, but he is on the road. He's with a client this morning. So I am flying solo today without him, but he is our EVP, Learning and Business Development. And Kevin Vogelsang, who is here, is our operations manager most of the time, but during these webinars, he serves as our host. So he will be monitoring chat for any input you all put in there, and watching for raised hands, letting me know what's going on if I get too wrapped up in what I'm saying about my slides. So that's Kevin's role. He'll probably spend most of his time off camera so that you don't. Although Kevin, you can certainly stay on camera if you want. Probably not. But anyway, that's who's running the show here. And a little bit about us. If you don't know who Turpa Communication is, we are consultants and trainers focusing on three types of situations. And each one of these things may include a whole lot of SMEs. We work with presenters, we work with meeting facilitators, and we work with trainers. So those are the three big buckets of the work that we do. Across the bottom of the screen, you can see that we've written a few books. The first one, the big cornerstone book for us, is The Orderly Conversation, which I'll be talking about in a bit. When the pandemic hit a few years ago, we wrote very quickly the virtual orderly conversation because we thought that would be appropriate for most people. And then finally, we wrote a book called Effective SMEs. Now that is pretty much directly related to what we're going to be talking about today, although the focus of that book is or the audience for that book rather, is people in learning and development who design training and coach SMEs to deliver training, because one of the most important roles for SMEs in organizations is to train others within those organizations, and the challenges they face, not only as SMEs but as trainers, are sometimes pretty huge. So that's what we do. That's our wheelhouse. And I want to talk now specifically about the subtitle here: how to be clear and concise when your brain is full of data. And I think my assumption is that everybody serves in the role of SME at some point in their working lives, because you're always going to be talking to people who have a different level of knowledge than you do about what you're talking about. You are going to be the expert in many situations when you are delivering information both to your teams and externally. So my assumption is that it's not a special category of person who is a SME, but that everybody is, and that we all need to flex as much as we can to meet the needs of the people that we are talking to. So I want to talk. Greg found this. I will be perfectly blunt. This isn't my research. He ran across this woman on LinkedIn named Wendy Castillo, and she had a lot to say about the challenges that SMEs face. This is an image of a brain, and what her point was, she uses Legos to make the point. When you are a SME, your head is full of a lot of stuff, and it different information, jumbled up information. Sometimes it may make sense to you, but for other people it might be really difficult to access and understand. So what she does is she talks about this pile of data, this raw data that we all have, and then she talks about the need to sort it and present it visually. So in other words, we can see from the sorted piles that the blue and the red and the yellow are big piles of stuff, but we wouldn't necessarily know that if we were to just randomly see that pile of stuff. So one way to organize things is to present it visually, and then finally to make that information useful. Take the data that you have, organize it in such a way so that someone who isn't familiar with it can understand its role, its purpose, its function, which is what those, the little toothbrush holder, one of those utensil holder, and the key thing represent that. So what we're going to be talking about today is, how does this happen? How do you make it easier for people to understand and use the information that you know so well? So let's look at it this way. If you're going to sort and present visually, that's part of the preparation process. But the presentation process, delivering that information to folks, is where you really reinforce the usefulness of the data that you are familiar with. Another way to look at it is that you know a lot. What you know is all inside this big oval, and what your audience needs might be a very, very small part of it. And if you're like me, I always hate it when I can't talk about everything I know about a topic. And I think that's what something that SMEs face all the time because the more technical you are, I am not a technical person, but the more technical you are, the more data you have, the more information you have, the more difficult it is to comfortably reduce the amount of information that you're delivering and focusing purely on what audiences need rather than what you know. So when you think about it this way, it's easier to understand. First of all, you as a business communicator, we all wear a couple of hats. As the expert over here on the left, you want people to understand data, you want to examine details, amass know-how, gain expertise. You want to do what you need to do to know what you're talking about in your job. As a communicator, though, your role is to set context. Your role is to be clear, relate to others, seek to be understood, share stories, and aid in decision making. And that last point there is really crucial because for a lot of folks, a lot of the SMEs we work with, for example, come in as part of the sales process. The salesperson may make an initial contact with someone. Maybe they're selling software. Let's make it simple. They're selling some sort of software, and they are not an expert in the software itself. So they bring in a SME, they bring in an engineer or whoever to talk about that software and maybe run a demo of it. Now, the purpose of the demo is not just to understand what the software does. That's only part of it. They want to help that decision maker on the client side make a decision about it. So it's not that they come in, okay, SME, okay, engineer, open your brain, show us what's in there, and we'll make sense of it. That's not it at all because we're incapable of doing that. So aiding in decision making is really crucial, and it requires the skills, as it says here, as of a communicator, not just as the expert. Maybe another example I should throw out is if you were ever, when you were in school, let's say you were in college, and there was a class that you were taking, and the professor could not make the data understandable to everybody in the room, that's a big problem. And so if that has ever happened to you, where you've sat there and wondered, am I in the wrong class? Was there a prerequisite here that I'm not aware of? If you're ever in that situation, it's because that subject matter expert is not working hard enough to make sure you understand what the data, what the information means. So let me ask you this question. As a SME, what communication challenges do you face? Just drop that in chat if you don't mind, and we'll take a look at it. Let me stop sharing to sort of open up the group a bit.
Bill, can you repeat that question? I'm sorry, I was a
Sure.
little distracted.
Sure. As a SME, what are the challenges that you've faced? Let's get a ballpark going here so that I can play in it. Distractions from outside parties. I prepare tax returns, explaining them to people. Oh, Tamber, I've been on the receiving end of that a lot. So I fully understand that. Learning some logistics, technical data, which I had to pass on. Okay. Recipient not having the level of knowledge expected, too much or too little. Interesting. Yeah, definitely. Being in the middle of engineering, customers, customer service, implementation support, needing to communicate in both directions. Oh, that's hard. I work in higher ed, having to deal with the helicopter parents. Oh, it's not funny, Carrie. I'm sorry. But I can only imagine what that's like. Information overload, not knowing how much to simplify the content for the audience, right? Good. Understanding how much expertise they have. These are great. Thank you. All right, let me go back to my screen. Thank you for that, everybody. Here's the agenda, and I think that I'm going to be able to address a lot of those issues that you just dropped into chat. We're going to talk about the guiding principles of effective communication in general, effective business communication. We've got to have a foundation for that. We're going to talk about getting your head together before you go in to deliver any sort of information, setting context for your audience, and making it easier for you and for them to understand, because you've got the one whoever mentioned I'm going in both directions, people that know a lot and people that don't know very much. That requires a lot of flexibility when you're communicating. You're constantly shifting gears to manage that. So let's talk about guiding principles. The the first book Greg and I wrote, The Orderly Conversation, as I said before, it's sort of the foundation of our work. And here it is in a nutshell, the whole book boiled down. Here we go. We've got two circles on this slide. One orderly, one a conversation. And every time that you're in a business setting where there's some sort of prep going on, you're in an orderly conversation, because on the orderly side, there's preparation, there's accuracy, there's structure. The accuracy part is incredibly important to a SME because you want to make sure that you are giving them information that is right. But even if you're not in that sort of situation, if you're not so worried about the accuracy of your data, you still need to be concerned about your prep and the structure of the data, the communication that you're doing. On the other side, the conversations require engagement, spontaneity, and interactivity. That's how every conversation functions. So as you can see here, the arrow between these two circles indicates that there's a big tension between those two things, because to be accurate, to be structured, it's very difficult to be spontaneous with that. So you want, how do you prepare, in other words, to have a conversation? That's a question that we are constantly trying to answer. It's possible to do it, but it's not as easy as some people may think. So if we look at the communication continuum to sort of get our heads around this, we can see that at work, we work from very informal situations to very formal situations. On the informal side, there are conversations, chance encounters that might happen in the break room. You might run into somebody in the hallway. It's these sorts of interactions during the pandemic that we lost. And it's these sort of interactions, based on what I've been reading lately, that organizations are trying to get back by forcing people back into the office, which of course is not making too many people very happy. But those conversations play a role, and the way they are, and they are not very structured, but they're important, but they're not very structured. On the other side here, we have speeches and TED Talks. Now, these types of interactions, most of us don't do, but they are very, very structured, and they're sort of the opposite in many ways of a conversation. So they're prepared, they're rehearsed, they're perfected. When you're rehearsing them, you want to recreate exactly what you did in that rehearsal during the delivery of the speech. So they're a very different type of process. And for some SMEs, they assume that when they're delivering a presentation that it has too many characteristics of a speech, because they're shooting for that sort of absolutely perfect explanation. Now, in the middle here, we have orderly conversations, and this is a much bigger bucket and a much more complex type of communication than these other two. Let me just pull out a couple of these examples. We've got, at 12 o'clock, we have pretty typical in a boardroom, having a meeting face to face. Down at 6 o'clock, we have the guy who's sitting in his office, probably alone, having a Teams meeting or a Zoom call. Over at maybe 7 o'clock, we have a hybrid meeting where you have some people present in the room and you have some people dialing in. So we have all these sorts of interactions here. And all of them are intended, as it says at the bottom here, to get business done. They are planned, they're structured, but they're also responsive and interactive. So they have characteristics of both the formal and the informal. And a SME, many, many times, really struggles with the conversation part of the process because they are so focused on the accuracy and the structure of what they're presenting. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you'll find a SME, or we've worked with SMEs who tend to be all over the place. They tend to wander, tend to not have much structure in what they're saying, and that's a problem as well. But the thing to remember is that success occurs through the conversation. You cannot prepare yourself to be perfectly successful. You have to manage the process that's taking place. And the more The more you're concerned about the accuracy of your information, the greater the challenge that's going to be. So going back to this image and adding a little bit to it, during the planning process, you're always looking ahead to the uncertainties of the conversation and accepting that fact. It's like, yeah, the helicopter parents are coming to mind. Let's say you're going to have a meeting with a couple of helicopter parents, or maybe a room full of helicopter parents, and which to me would be a nightmare. But the point is, you want to make sure that you're preparing yourself to manage all the potential issues they might have. So you can be all prepared, as much prepared as you can possibly be. But when you get in there, you might get something thrown at you that you didn't expect. The more you can anticipate those things, the better. When the conversation's going forward, of course, you're always adapting the plan to what's happening in the moment. You have to do your best to make sure that you are zigging and zagging enough to keep everybody with you so that you don't lose anybody in the process. So that's what the whole prep through delivery process looks like for an orderly conversation. What that means is business communicators succeed on two different levels. This is an extension of the two circles, because we have on the left-hand side, the first level is the plan. You want to achieve the goal the business wants you to achieve. That means you get your audience to buy, agree, align, learn, whatever your goal is. You want to reach it. That's your job. That's what the business wants you to do. That's what should happen. You achieve it, though, through the second level, through the process of the conversation. And as it says there, you need to manage that. Reading through these bullets, you want to create the conditions for a fruitful discussion, earn trust and goodwill, make it easy for everybody, manage the give and take, and nurture relationships. Now, a couple of these, earning trust and goodwill and nurturing relationships, those are sort of long-term issues. Amber, going to the tax returns, being understandable is really important for the people that you're talking to. They don't maybe need to know anything about the details of what you're doing. They just want to trust you that you've made the right decisions, which is sort of like the helicopter parents too, and all the other situations that we've faced. You want them to walk away thinking, oh, this person knows what she's doing. And I don't understand all the details, but I trust her. And that's a really nice goal for a SME to have. And the way you reach that you can look at the more nitty gritty issues on this list, make it easy for people, manage the give and take, which of course involves really good listening skills. Creating the conditions for a fruitful discussion is part of what I'm going to be talking about, is a chief part of what I'm going to be talking about going forward, is what do you do to make sure that you are setting yourself up to be successful, not only in terms of what you're saying, but also how you're managing the conversation. So let's go to get your head together where we can really zero in on that process. You're going to have access to a handout that looks like this. It's our framing strategy worksheet, and it helps you, and it's the first few steps in it help you take a step back to really consider, what do I need to do with this group of people? What's my goal, and how can I create those conditions for the fruitful conversation? So let's use an example. Let's say that I'm an analyst in R&D at a food manufacturing company. Oh, I see there's a chat up here. Kevin, do I need to be worried about that? Yes. Communication
It
to
was
build
just
behavior.
an answer to your previous question.
Great. Thank you. Back to my example. I'm an analyst in R&D, so I'm in research and development at a manufacturing company. Okay. Now, whoops, let me get this going again. And I work with data from scientific research, market research, manufacturing capabilities. So I have to have a lot of things that I need to be concerned about. Because of some recent supply chain issues, I'm working closely with Glenn. Glenn is a vendor relations manager. So we've got, this probably grew out of the pandemic with everybody's supply chain problems. But let's take a look at how I'm going to think about a presentation to leadership in my organization. We're going to start with the first step here. I'm going to identify my goal. So at the first page of this document that you're going to get, let me just get you oriented. On the right-hand side here, we've got recommendations for how to use the document. As you can see at the top, in persuasive situations, make a recommendation for your audience to do something. You don't want, which is something A lot of folks, when they're delivering informative presentations, they always assume, well, I just am here to deliver information. And sometimes that bleeds over into the persuasive stuff too, assuming that the data speaks for itself. And of course, it doesn't always. And so, and many people can't make that jump between data and decision. And so you're there to help them do it. So anyway, back to the other side. At the end of my presentation, I want my audience to be able to make a decision, go or no go with product X. So the purpose of this presentation is to help them decide what they should do with this new product. Let's look at the second step, which is assessing your audience. This one asks a lot of questions. Some of them are going to be relevant in a given situation, some of them will not. So I'm not going to answer all of these questions, but there's a broad enough range here that you can choose the ones you think are most relevant for the audience you're dealing with. For me, it's my audience is leaders and decision makers. Are there key people? Yes. Virginia is the most senior leader in the room, and so she's going to be probably the main decision maker there. What are their pain points? Vendors. So they're not very happy with the vendor situation, and that's of course the problem that relates to going forward or not with this new product. How much do they care about your goal? A lot. This is a very big deal to them. And are they difficult to persuade? No. So that's good to know. So this is another way for you to step back and think, okay, who am I dealing with here? And what are their attitudes about what I'm saying? Now, this seems really obvious, but you would be surprised how much can be learned by going through this process. I think here at Turpin, we do our best to make sure that we're framing up every meeting that we have. And trust me, it's not always intuitive to do it. And this step really slows down the thinking process to think, okay, who exactly are these people? And what do I know about them before we even go through the door? Taking these steps helps you figure out these things: level of detail, what to leave in or take out, degree of persuasion, order of the agenda, and to uncover cultural considerations. That can be global cultural considerations. It can be cultural considerations within the organization itself. So take the time to really assess the audience, and you'll find a lot of useful information. So taking the next step here, what is their current situation? When they walk in the room to talk to you, to meet with you, what's going on in their heads? You want to really get specific with that and figure out as much as you possibly can. So again, same thing, directions on the right, fill out on the left. My audience's current situation is they want to be first to market. Which is sort of when you're in manufacturing and when you're in R&D, you always are working with people that want that product out there so that they can be the first one to grab the buyer. They're concerned about the history with certain vendors in the supply chain, going back to the vendor again. Step 4, organize your agenda. And the agenda is just a list of things you're going to be talking about. Now, as I said in the previous slide, you might want to, or 2 back, who they are might determine the order of your agenda. But the agenda is simply a list of things that you're going to be talking about. Remember, going back to the 2 circles images on the orderly side, to be orderly is to be structured. And audiences need that structure because it makes it easier for them to follow along. So here's the recommendation for this presentation. We're going to start off with the recommendation of go. Yes, it's a big yes for product X. We're going to talk about new vendor agreements. Glenn is going to help me with that. We're going to talk about new market research and review consumer demand, which is important, and also manufacturing capability, and that's going to be Inez. So there are going to be people working with me during this meeting, Glenn and Inez, but here's the structure of the thing. Everybody knows from the very beginning exactly what's going to be covered. And then finally, the last step in this part of the preparation process is to identify benefits for the audience. What will they gain? What are they going to walk away with? They're going to be able to make the decision. They're going to become comfortable with that decision, and they're going to be able to set next steps. So again, going back to what I said about the current situation, you want to be really narrow in terms of the takeaways. What do they benefit from this presentation? Not global yearly sales, not any of that stuff at this point. This is about simply that decision that's going to be made during the presentation that you're delivering. So now we use that information after you go through those steps in the framing worksheet and use that information to come up with a way to set context for your audience. And that's what I want to talk about going forward. Now you'll notice, this is the next page in the handout, these look like stickies, and they are stickies. If we were working in a live workshop, we would hand you a sticky and say, fill these things out for these 4 steps: audience's current situation, the presentation goal, the agenda, and the benefits to them. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail, going back again to the Product X presentation. As you all know, you have a desire to be first to market within this new category, and you are concerned at this point about supply chain issues. So my goal today is to help you make a decision about Product X. The agenda, we're going to talk about 4 things. First, the recommendation, and as you can see here, the recommendation is to go forward. Number 2, vendor agreements. Glenn's going to cover that. Number 3, new market research and review consumer demand. And then finally, Inez will wrap things up with manufacturing capability. When we're finished today, I want you all to feel comfortable moving forward with the decision and set next steps so that we can keep this project on the road. Okay, that's 2 things I want to point out here. This is short. This is the frame for your presentation, and it does not need to be very detailed. In fact, it shouldn't be. It should be very concise, because all you're doing is setting yourself up for what is to come. The agenda covers all the details. This is simply the way to start the conversation. The second thing is it gives people a sense of structure through that agenda, and also you create the impression that you know what they're thinking right now, and you know what they want walking away. So what that means is you're answering 2 questions. What are we talking about, and why are we talking about it? Those are the purposes of the current situation benefits and the goal and the agenda. I'm obsessed with the helicopter parents, because I'm wondering, what would a helicopter parent want in a meeting at the university they're going to send their kid to? I would think they would want assurance that everything is going to be fine for Billy, for the kid. I assume that's the benefit. And so you'd want to make sure that you acknowledge the fact that they're a little unsure in the current situation, and the other part of the why is that you're going to be fine. That this child of yours who is so important is going to be okay. So it's very similar to what's happening here with this presentation, in that you're acknowledging the attitudes at the beginning and what you're hoping for, the feelings that you're hoping that they walk away with. Let's look at another example. This is marketing analytics. So same process as before. Organic website traffic is trending down, and the competition is getting higher search results. So we have a problem here, because we are all in this room fear losing market share. So the goal of the presentation today is to explain why this is happening and to lay out a path forward to stop this from happening. The agenda looks like this. Analytics first, we're going to find out what's going on. 2, how to combat the competition through organic SEO keyword rewrites and paid ads. And 3, maximizing existing traffic that we already have. Benefit for you is it will maintain market share. So this, again, is going in to solve a problem that is articulated in the current situation. The good feelings of fixing it are articulated in the benefits. So again, it's what are we talking about and why. One more example. This is a sales support product demo. This is an example I was talking about earlier. And so supporting Shane in sales. So I am helping Shane in the sales process. Okay, you've been working with Shane for a while now, and you have questions about a couple of things: third-party integrations and cybersecurity. So I'm here today to answer those questions for you and to put your minds at ease. The agenda, we're going to do a quick acclimation to the interface. We're going to talk about API administration and security measures. When I'm finished, you'll have more comfort moving forward with Shane, and you'll be ready for data migration. So again, what and why we're talking about. And both, again, no details right off the bat. You got to set the stage. You've got to make sure that you are establishing an understanding of their perspective so that they will want to participate in the conversation with you. Because in many situations, I know for me, many times I'm sitting at a meeting or a conference and I'm wondering, what what am I even supposed to take away from this? What do I want from this? When we're meeting with our our tax people or our investment people, many, and this is real life, this is absolutely true. I walk away from the meeting thinking, I didn't understand that. But I like him. He's a nice guy and his team seems nice, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do or what this information is supposed to help me understand or do. So I think that by taking the time to make sure that you're doing this is the first step to establishing that context and making sure people know how they should respond. So the one big takeaway from that is you want to lead with your point. As you can see here in this little image, we've got the thesis statement. If you think back to school when you were writing essays, or your recommendation at work, you should start with that and then make a decision or not to go into more detail. Do you need the supporting information or the evidence, or do you just need to say, here's what I'm recommending? The same thing applies when you're answering questions. You want to make sure that you're giving this easy, short answer first. And if you need to go into more detail, do it. But don't make people wait till you've said, 2 or 3 minutes worth of information, and then you finally say, so the answer to your question is no. Because that's frustrating for one thing. I'm sure we've all experienced that. And so you want to have your I guess your wits about you, for lack of a better phrase. Take the time to pause and think, okay, what's the short answer here? What's the one sentence answer here, or the one word answer here? Because that's going to help people listen much more effectively, because the information you provide later is supporting that statement, that initial statement. Very much like an essay's thesis statement. Okay, here's my point. Now here's why. I want you to buy into that point. Okay, last item on the agenda here is to make it easy for you and for them. And I want to emphasize the fact that it says for you as well as them. So you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up in the best way possible to succeed. And that is often the last thing people worry about when they're putting together slides, for example, for a presentation. So I want to go back to this image. We've already seen it. Managing the conversation. This part is about making it easy for them. The top bullet was covered with the framing stuff, creating the conditions for a fruitful discussion. Then once that conversation starts, it's your responsibility to make it easy. And that is hard. It's not very intuitive to step outside yourself and think, okay, what do they need right now? Rather than what do I need to say right now? So it's a matter of really making that bridge happen. So what does make it easy mean? You want them to understand your objective and what they need. You want to lead with your point. You want to simplify content and reduce cognitive load. So if we look at this in a little more detail, we've talked about understanding your objective and what they need using the framing strategy. We've talked about leading with your point, and we've talked about simplifying the content. What we haven't talked about yet is reducing cognitive load. And one thing I want to point out before we get into cognitive load is that all of these bullets here are parallel. And that is one way to make it easy for you as the presenter, because the recommendation we always make with bullet points is make them short enough to read and then read them. I know that breaks rules that you've probably been taught, but do it anyway. Because when you make the bullets short enough and clear enough, reading them is very simple, and understanding is very simple. And after you've shortened them, make sure that they're parallel. This goes back to English class. This goes back to making sure that your list of things or the things following a comma are all parallel to each other so that the sentence flows smoothly. All right, let's talk about cognitive load. I want to read the definition of it because it's an interesting concept and one that is incredibly relevant for the work that we do and the presentations that you do. Cognitive load is the amount of working memory being used, like RAM in your computer, only it's for the human brain. So when memory usage on your computer is high, like it is on my computer, the system starts to slow down, which it already is doing, my computer, and it doesn't function as efficiently. The same thing happens with learning. So you want to make sure that you're eliminating as much unnecessary information as you can to make understanding easier. According to the Dictionary of Psychology, cognitive load is the relative demand imposed by a practical task in terms of mental resources required. It's also called mental load. So you want to go back to the brain with all the Legos. You want to be able to simplify things enough so that you can take in the appropriate Legos, so that you yourself are not overwhelmed, and so that the people you're talking to are not overwhelmed. Let's look at this example of a problem with cognitive load. We've all seen this type of thing. Here we have, well, this screenshot is taken from Brooke Baldwin's celebration for 10 years at CNN. Good for Brooke. Okay, but let's look at the screen. We've got a picture of Brooke. We've got the headline that it's Brooke's last day. And then we have down at the bottom, 50 Facebook pages identified in tech. Okay, that's totally different topic. And then over here on the other side, we have stocks, the NASDAQ. So if you're looking at this screen, there's a lot to take in and there's a lot of cognitive load. And if you're not familiar with this sort of screen, and if you're not, maybe you're only interested in the Facebook stuff down at the bottom, you're going to ignore naturally everything about Brooke because you don't care about Brooke. You care about those 50 Facebook pages identified with check, all of that stuff at the bottom. But without that prior knowledge, without understanding how this thing is set up, if you were to throw this up on the screen, people would have trouble understanding what they were looking at. And this is incredibly common in the world of cable news, but it's also really, really common in the world of business presentations. And it's very close to texting and driving. Let's get into a dangerous situation here. It is impossible to text and drive at the same time. You cannot do both things. Your brain won't let you. So, which is why when I'm driving and I see somebody on the phone over there in the other lane, I get away from them as soon as I possibly can, because I know that if their attention is going down to the phone, they're not paying attention to what's happening on the road. So think about that as a good analogy for the need to simplify and control focus during your presentations. So ways to reduce cognitive load. Simplify content, both for you and for your audience, and treat slides as show and tell. This is a really simple way to look at the slides that you're delivering, but it really is helpful. So what I mean by it is, as you can see here, we've got a woman using a screen. She's face-to-face. It's not a remote meeting or a hybrid meeting, and she's using a slide. On the slide, we have basically 3 chunks of information. We've got the pie chart, the table, upper left, and then bullet points underneath the table. So there's a lot there. It's like the CNN screen. You know, where do you look? What is this? When that thing is flashed up on the screen, I do not immediately take in what I'm supposed to be looking at. So, whoops. Remember that your job is to make, I think I need some water, if you'll excuse me. That's why we always have 2 people on these things. You just get dry after a while. Okay. Make slides part of the conversation, not something that exists outside of it. This, I cannot tell you how important this is, because so many times you see people that are putting a slide on the screen and then not doing anything with it. And this kind of is part of the don't read it, they can read it, or never look at your slide, or never turn your back rules. All of those things create a separation between the visual and you. And that's not what you want to have happen. You want a connection between the visual and you. So as you can see here, you can control where people look by pointing, as she's doing there on the screen. She's adding animation. I could add animation as I'm doing right here. And she's using descriptive language. Upper right-hand graph, orange slice of the pie. And you can use the zoom and magnifying tool in PowerPoint to do that. I don't know if you're familiar with it, so I'll show you that tool. Down here at the lower left, there are these little grayed out button things. If you choose the one that looks like a magnifying glass and then click on the part of the screen you want to focus on, you can blow it up so that you can, as she says, here's the orange slice of the pie, ignore the table, ignore the bullets for now, let's just look at this piece of the pie. She is controlling where you're looking and using the screen in a way that makes the understanding easier rather than more challenging for the people in the audience. So get familiar with that tool. I love it because it really, well, especially because it's easy to say, make your slides as simple as possible. Sometimes that is really impossible because you may be using an Excel spreadsheet, you may be using a form, you may be putting any amount of information up on the screen that can't be changed. That tool helps you zero in on what part of the slide you want people to look at, and it makes life a lot easier for you and for the people you're talking to. Okay, craft useful slide titles. This is one way to help yourself, but also to help the people that you're talking to. And I'm going to use a really simple example here from the Orderly Conversation. We have one of the presenters that we talked about in that book. We made these people up, but they're very realistic, is a guy named Lewis. Lewis is high energy. He's disorganized. He's in his head. He's forgetful. He's brilliant, but he's got issues with his communication because of these issues. So he needs to create slides that are going to be easier for him because his brain is always going in a million different directions. So he has high cognitive load just walking in the door. Here's one of his slides. The title of it is Gross Sales. As you can see, it's in millions and it goes from January through October. And as you can see, his company's doing pretty well. Its sales are going up, which is really nice. And maybe this slide title would help him make that point. Month over month sales grows. Sales growth is more specific in terms of what the slide means than gross sales. So month over month sales growth will help him and it will also help his audience. Also, if you use a trigger like this oval, and I'm sure you've all done this, but the big jump between April and May might be really significant for this presentation. And so including it on the slide helps Lewis because he won't forget. It also reinforces the point for the people that he's talking to. So that's one way to take a step back from just the pure data, the raw numbers, to talk about what it means, which is what managing the process as a SME really is about. He could bring this up and say, what happened here is interesting. Let me tell you a story. And that's another way for him to step back from the data and talk about what the data means. Storytelling, I'm sure you've heard lots of stuff about the importance and the relevance of storytelling in business. And it really is a good thing to do, not just for the people you're talking to, but also for you as the presenter, because it gets you, again, away from the data and into a different level of understanding, sometimes involving emotions, sometimes involving, what a relief it will be when this happens, or how you don't need to worry anymore about something. So think about that as you're organizing your presentations as well. Another interesting idea that we found recently is you want to think about labels. You could reduce cognitive load by simplifying and you being real intentional with the labels that you use. And here's an example of that. This is an information processing model. As you can, we have 3 boxes, a bunch of arrows, a loop at the top. And by labeling these things on that image, a label diagram places lower demand on working memory than one that has labels listed at the side, like this one. So as you can see, this is from Mind Tools, as you can see there. According to them, this right-hand side image is much more difficult to understand than the left hand. And if that seems obvious to me, it's like, what? Just moving from the bottom up to the top, that inch or two on my screen is hard. I forget as I move from one to the next. And the one over here on the left is much easier. So think about, trying to think of an example from our own work, and I'm failing at that. But it's just thinking about where you place information on your slide, how you manage that process, how you manage if it's a bunch of arrows or if it's a list, how you manage those things to be understandable really is important because it simplifies it. It, as I've been saying, it reduces cognitive load. Okay. I'm going to start wrapping things up here. We talked about how business communicators wear two hats. We've got the expert, we've got the communicator, and the expert is always fighting with the communicator. The more you know, the more difficult it is to explain it. And and I think it comes down to because it feels like you're not doing your job. So many times, if I get asked a question about, the best way to organize something or what I think about, certain delivery techniques, my gut tells me to tell them everything I know, everything I've learned over the years and in school or wherever to answer that question. And it's really difficult to realize that my communicator hat is not only about the details, it's also about all the understanding that needs to take place. Remember, success occurs by way of the conversation. Keep that in mind when you have all these different environments that you're presenting information in. Don't lose the fact that you are really connecting with individuals that are in the room, whether it's virtually or not. And your job is to make sure that you're using that interaction with them to succeed. This is the slide Greg put in. I'm going to blame it on him. It's a little embarrassing, but if you enjoyed today, review us on Google. It really helps. So if you feel like doing that, that's terrific. Oh, shoot, I forgot I'm being recorded. Sorry about throwing you under that bus, Greg, but I did. Upcoming webinars. We're taking a few months off here at Turpin, and we're going to start up again in January when it's nice and cold. On January 10th, we're going to do leadership communication in the virtual world. Join us for that. It's our most popular webinar because it talks about not only leadership, but communication in business, but also the challenges of virtual communication. And then on January 11th, this one, frankly, is my personal favorite because it's about feedback without fear. It's a way to help people deliver coaching, deliver feedback to folks on their communication skills in a way that makes sense and in a way that is comfortable for everybody involved. Because whenever you're delivering feedback, I'm thinking about performance reviews or I just watched your presentation and I've got to give you some feedback on it. That's many times for many people a really difficult spot to be in. And so that webinar gives you a strategy to manage that process, which is why I tend to like it a lot. If you want to set up a time to talk to us about going forward with any work that you want, here is a picture of Greg, and you have access to his calendar. You can go in there and set up a meeting with him, and he would be very happy to hear from you. What you're going to have going away, starting at the lower right-hand corner, you got the framing strategy that Kevin, is that going into chat or is that going out in an email?
Both. I just put it into chat now, and everyone will get an email later
Oh,
today
great.
with the link
So
as well.
And the virtual orderly conversation is there as well. And the orderly conversation, the book, you can go buy that if you want it. Find an independent retailer to do that, just to keep them in business. So that's all I'm going to say about that. All right. So thank you very much. I like doing these things. They're always fun for me. And you can always link with us on LinkedIn is what this slide is all about as well, to keep track of what we're doing in all three of these areas of business communication. Okay, that's my last slide. And we're early, which is nice. So if you want to take off and go to your next meeting, that's great. I want to thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to go through this information with you. And if you have any questions about what I've covered, please stick around and ask them.